Hey everybody, it's John Pollock. On August the 14th, the Ontario government announced that they are going to move forward to regulate and sanction the sport of mixed martial arts. Tom Wright was named as the Director of Operations for UFC Canada just this past May, and he was here in our office. I had the opportunity to sit down with Tom where we discussed the announcement and what comes next as the UFC plans to invade Ontario in 2011. Tom, August 14th, 2010, a huge day for the province of Ontario when it comes to mixed martial arts. The day that the history books can officially begin to be written in terms of the progression of the sport. But you've just been heading up the UFC offices here in Canada for under 3 months, and already this huge announcement that did catch a lot of people off guard on Saturday.
Well, John, you're right. It was a great day for mixed martial arts, for our sport in not only this province, but in the country. And specifically for us, it's an exciting time. But you know what, we've been working with the Ontario government for at least the past 2 years. And as you know, when you're trying to build a new sport, when you're trying to enter into new kinds of territories, these things take time. And so yeah, I think the August 14th announcement was the culmination of a lot of hard work by a lot of really committed people. I give a lot of credit to McGuinty's government, to Sophia Agilanidis, who really did her homework and listened to Ontarians, but went out and actually got some facts and talked to stakeholders and looked at studies and really determined that our sport has come a long way and that it's the right thing for the athletes, for our sport, that it be regulated. And the only way it gets regulated is for it to be sanctioned. And if you don't sanction it, it's going to go underground, and then you're not going to have safe competitions. You're not going to have consistent competitions. So, I think it is a great day, but there's still a lot of hard work to go, and you know that.
Is that a common thread you've seen, Tom, in terms of critics of the sport who are not familiar with the sport, that once they actually sit down, take in a mixed martial arts event, a lot of preconceived notions are put to rest at that point, on top of the facts and figures that are associated with the sport?
John, you're absolutely right. And what I found is that our fan base, our fans, they're incredibly avid. I mean, you can't find any more passionate fans than we have in MMA. But then there's this huge chasm between the passionate fans and the regular sport people or regular consumers that really don't have any understanding. And so they have awareness of it, but no understanding. And so that's one of our biggest challenges is the educational program that's required. And government officials were a classic example. People have these misconceptions about our sport. They think that our athletes are all on steroids. They think that the competitions aren't fair. They think that there isn't a unified set of rules. But once you sit down with them and you talk with them and you provide them with the details, you provide them with the facts so that they can make informed, objective, rational decisions, we don't expect everybody to be a fan. But all we want them to do is make an objective, have an opinion that's based on fact, not that's based on fallacy.
Do you see a lot of comparisons to another part of your life, overseeing the Canadian Football League and dealing with critics of football? But in that case, football much more ingrained in the culture because of the history behind it. Do you see some common links between criticisms of both?
Well, you know what? I'm actually not really, John. I think that the actual connection that I see between the Canadian Football League and our league, the UFC, and our sport is that the athletes themselves are very similar in as much as they're incredibly passionate, they're incredibly talented, but what they really are is accessible and they're approachable. When you take a look at most professional athletes and you think of the major leagues, you think of the NFL, you think of Major League Baseball, you think of the NBA, NHL, and then I think of the CFL and I think of the UFC. And I see in those two sports, those two leagues, athletes that are approachable and they're accessible and they really want to get out and engage and have contact in their communities. And I think that's one of the real commonalities between those two sports. I think that football traces its roots back to the 1800s to rugby. The CFL, as you know, the 98th Grey Cup is going to happen in Edmonton this year, so it's been around a long time. I think maybe some of the fallacies that people have regarding football, which is an interesting one, is that they don't see it as much of a contact combat sport as say mixed martial arts. And one of the things I try to point out is that there's more incidents of serious injuries, serious head injuries, overall serious injuries in football than there are in mixed martial arts. But people don't make that connection because they see football players with helmets, and then they see mixed martial arts where there might be a lot of blood on the mat. Well, those are superficial injuries, as you know. You watch a football game, and I tell you, well, on the offensive and defensive line, you want to see combat, you want to see contact. That's where it happens as well. And there are studies coming out in the United States that actually show that in the United States there are more serious injuries in, are you ready for this? Competitive cheerleading than there are in mixed martial arts. And so, I mean, that's there's all sorts of examples, but one of our jobs as the promoters of the game and to try to build the sport of mixed martial arts is to dispel those notions and to make sure that people are forming their perspective from information that's real.
Now, in the wake of this announcement in Ontario, we haven't heard any statement from the Ontario Athletic Commission and Ken Hayashi. What has their reaction been, and what has your relationship been like with Ken Hayashi, who has been a staunch opponent of mixed martial arts coming to the province? Is he more open to the sport now with this announcement?
Well, John, it's early days. I mean, you have to remember that the announcement was only made last Saturday, and I know we've already reached out to Ken Hayashi. Mark Ratner in our U.S. offices has spoken to Ken. I've reached out to him as well, and our plans are to sit down with him as quickly as possible to make sure that he understands that we're here to be a resource for them, that we're here to support his efforts. There's a lot of work that has to be done, but you have to also remember that Ontario is not the first province or the first state to actually regulate the sport. There's a lot of other jurisdictions that have actually gone through this process. The minister said that the standard that they were going to be looking at will be the state of New Jersey. Obviously, there's 45 other states that have already gone through this process, and there are 6 other provinces that have already started this process. So we will help Mr. Hayashi and help Ken through the work that has to be done. We're here to support it, but we're also here to make sure that we do this properly. We haven't set any timetables that say it has to be done by this date. It's the government's role, and we're here to support the government in this instance.
Now, another story that came out over the past week was the British Columbia Medical Association, Dr. Ian Gillespie. They're trying to table a notion to the CMA, the Canadian Medical Association, trying to ban the sport within the country. And I'm curious if they have tried to contact you, because in their lone statement that they've released, I found quite a number of fundamental flaws to their issues. And in some of their radio interviews this week, it seems that it's like we were talking earlier, a very elementary knowledge of the sport. Have they reached out to you? Has there been any dialogue between both yourself and the British Columbia Medical Association?
Well, John, no, we haven't had any direct dialogue, and we're following this very closely. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, that you're seeing some really rudimentary knowledge of our sport, some decisions that are made or proposals that are being recommended based on either old facts or no facts. Dr. Gillespie, I believe himself, has admitted that he has not ever attended a mixed martial art event, has never watched one, and was relying on data that was going back to the late 1990s. So I think that we've reached out in different ways to the BC Medical Association. We want to make sure that they provide a fair and balanced approach on this issue, and that they look at the facts. I mean, we provided them with a lot of different facts. The Johns Hopkins study, which I'm sure you've seen, you know what that one talks about in terms of the incidence of traumatic head injuries in other sports compared to ours, and that it's so much more prevalent in boxing than in ours. And I think at the end, I mean, it goes back to what we were chatting about earlier, John. One of the reasons why you want a sport regulated is so that the safety of the athletes is protected. And in the absence of regulation, it'll drive the sport underground, and people will get hurt. And so if I'm a medical association, I really want to make sure that those kinds of principles and those kinds of standards and those kinds of requirements are put in place. And frankly, that's what we're here to help with. So we're more than happy to sit down with the BC Medical Association, the Canadian Medical Association, and help develop those standards so that athletes' safety is taken care of.
One of the interesting parts about the province of Ontario when it comes to regulating boxing is that they've instituted same-day weigh-ins for boxers so that they cannot gain X amount of pounds prior to a fight. Is that something that we could see incorporated into mixed martial arts, or is it something that's still a detail that has to be worked out with the Ontario Athletic Commission?
I think that'll be a detail that we'll have to work out with the Athletics Commission. And you know, it's a good point you bring up, John. I'm not sure whether or not that's a consistent requirement, or at least a consistent standard for MMA events across North America. I know for the UFC, we always have our weigh-ins on the day before. If a fight's on a Saturday, we'll do the weigh-ins on the Friday. So I'm not sure whether that's consistent across all 46 states in the U.S. But those are the kinds of conversations that we'll obviously have with Ken and with members of the Athletics Commission here in Ontario, so we can establish those standards.
And also shifting focus to our friends in British Columbia, now that we're a few months removed from the UFC 115 event, gaining a tremendous response from people within Vancouver and across the country who attended the event. There were lots of issues going into that show, the high insurance rates, politicians that were having issues with it. What is the current situation within British Columbia coming off of that event, and is that going to be a regular tour stop for the UFC?
Well, we'd like it to be a regular tour stop for the UFC, and we certainly we're very happy with UFC 115. You know, the folks at GM Place, now Rogers Arena, were happy as well. And so, you know, John, we're going to continue to work with them. We've already reached out, and I plan to be in Vancouver sometime next month to sit down with the people at the city. As you know, it's right now it's being regulated by the city. The province, you know, abdicated that responsibility to the municipalities in the province. So we would like to see it a regular stop on our calendar, but we obviously want to work with them and make sure that the next time we go to Vancouver, that all the work that goes ahead of it is a little more smooth for us, because it was bumpy heading into to 115, and we want to make sure that it's good and fair for everybody.
When will the UFC be running here in Toronto? You mentioned earlier that you know, you guys aren't racing to hit a certain target, but is the Rogers Centre going to be the first show, or is that something that's still up for negotiation?
That's still up for negotiation. I mean, clearly we made the decision in Ontario. The first stop will be in Toronto, and we know it'll happen sometime in 2011, but we've not set a date and we've not chosen a venue. You know, I think if you step back, you can figure out that it's, you know, they're pretty close, the two that we would look at, Rogers Centre and the Air Canada Centre, and they're both terrific facilities, but we haven't chosen one and we haven't set a date. You know, we've got a lot of hard work and heavy lifting to do still to get all the regulatory requirements in place. But one thing I can tell you is that when it does happen, it'll be a fun evening. It'll be a great week. I think we'd like to bring one of our fan expos to precede the card in Toronto. It'll be a lot of fun.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you so much for chatting with us. An amazing job done in these first 3 months. And
thanks, John.
I know it's a lot of people being given a lot of credit, but we thank you very much for talking to us.
Anytime, John. It's my pleasure.